Hello everyone. Today I'm going to present about another episode of Herald Tribune World Youth Forum from 1954. This episode discussion about do American children have too much freedom? Presenter of the discussion is Mrs. Helen Height Waller. Participated following students: Nasreen NAZIR Mahmood from Pakistan, Mijiba KARIBO Nigeria, Nakchung PAIK from Korea, Eeva Karrina LEHTINEN from Finland.
Educational Television, a program distributed by the Educational Television and Radio Center.
Do American children have too much freedom?
I feel that according to my standards as a Muslim, the American children do have too much freedom.
I come from Nigeria, and I think that American children are brought up the way that is best for America.
I'm a Korean. I don't think I know the answer. America is such a perplexing country. My opinions are constantly changing.
My country is Finland. I feel that American children sometimes they have too much freedom. But in other times, I was surprised to find that they have not freedom enough for their full personality development.
This is the world we want, with young people from the four corners of the globe brought together by the New York Herald Tribune Forum for High Schools, here to discuss the world we want under the direction of Helen Height Waller.
Participating in tonight's discussion are 4 students from 4 different countries, all of whom have very strong ideas on this subject of whether or not American children have too much freedom. Let me introduce them to you now. First, here is Nasreen Ahmad from Pakistan. Nasreen, show us how you use that pretty veil of yours, will you?
Like this.
Ah. From Nigeria, West Africa, is Mijiba KARIBO. Minji finds our food so tasteless, I'm afraid, that she carries a bottle of pepper around with her in her purse all the time so she can season it to taste. Next is Nakchung PAIK from Korea. Nakchung's been down at the George School in Pennsylvania this week. And finally, Eeva LEHTINEN from Finland.
May I say something, Mrs. Waller?
Yes, go on, Eeva.
When I came here, I can tell you I was rather well prepared for everything I should see. But I didn't know there would be so much smile. When I walk in those schools where I have visited, I can just feel the friendliness flow against me.
Oh, I want to say something too. You just mentioned that I have been visiting the George School in Pennsylvania. I was very much impressed by their Quaker meetings. I was deeply moved by their silence, simplicity, and piety. It was a little bit amazing to find things like those meetings in this noisy, busy, and complicated country.
Well, I'm awfully glad you had that experience, Nakchung. I wish all of you could have. Now, to begin tonight's discussion, particularly after what Nasreen has said with such vehemence, maybe you ought to each tell us what is the main contrast between the amount of freedom teenagers have in your country and the amount they have here. Do you want to start, Nasreen?
Yes, I think I will, Mrs. Waller. I find a very sharp contrast here between the students here and the students in my country. I feel that even in their domestic life and in their school life, people are more reserved and more reticent, and they don't lay so much emphasis on social life as the American students. And you always have things like dating and going out with people and boyfriends and things like that, which we don't have at all. And I find that, I hear of girls saying, oh, we're going up to weekends to Dartmouth or to Yale or Princeton.
I think there's something unheard of in Karachi to go off alone for a weekend with a boys' college. It's something that quite surprised me.
How about you, Minji?
Well, as Eeva said, I think in some cases American children don't have enough freedom. They are not allowed to show up their individual qualities. You know, every girl thinks it's fashionable to go dating, and some girls even don't speak the truth about dates, and they think it's fashionable to tell lies about going on dates during weekends, when as a matter of fact they sat at home all the time.
Well, why do you suppose they said they had dates when they didn't?
Because it was the fashion and they weren't free to express their own opinion. They wanted to be in the know.
I disagree, both you Nasreen and you Mijiba. Of course, the American children do have very much freedom, and sometimes it may seem too much. But you cannot judge the amount of freedom the American children have by your standard. I mean, of course, I come from Korea, and Korea is very much different from America. And I see, well, such an informality between the ages or between the sexes. I get rather shocked. But the fact that it is shocking does not necessarily mean that it is not good for them. And well, I don't think that
Well, Peg, I don't think it's good for Pakistanis because all our life we haven't had freedom, the girls and boys there. And if we were given suddenly this amount of freedom, I'm afraid you would hear of fearful consequences.
That is right. I mean, the fact that the freedom of the Americans is good for the American children does not necessarily mean that you can apply it to Pakistan.
That's right, we cannot.
But the fact that you cannot apply it to the Pakistan children does not necessarily mean that it is bad for Americans.
I agree with you.
In some respects, it is bad for the Americans. I'll tell you where. In the respect, well, where it concerns respect between a student and a teacher, or a student and his or her parents. I find that the students here, with their relationship towards the teachers, I feel it's a bit too informal. I should think that a student and a teacher, well, a student is brought up with the idea of respecting the teacher. A teacher is somebody to look up to.
Wait a minute, Nasreen. But at the same time, did you notice that the teachers and the parents didn't seem to mind how the children behave to them? I think if they don't mind, then American children don't have too much freedom. After all, it depends on the reaction of the adults, and the grown-ups here don't seem to mind a bit.
Oh, they do.
I'm sure they do.
I found, for example, just today when I came to New York in the station, I spoke with a lady. I don't know who she was, but she always spoke about very many things. And then I spoke about this Herald Tribune and our forum and so on, and then I said we shall have a discussion this night on TV about American children's. Oh, they have so much freedom, quite too much freedom. They never respect our ideas. They never do what we want them to do.
Excuse me.
She said she was one of the grown-ups.
She said so. Well, did you ask her who gave the children the freedom? Did they snatch it themselves?
Well, that's quite conventional, as you say, Minji. It's something which the Americans here have to do. I mean, if one parent is strict with his child and the other parents aren't, the child will say, well, look at the Jones family. The parents aren't strict there. Why are you strict with me? It's something quite conventional,
well,
as you say.
You mean that it's just a few people who sort of spread the freedom all over America?
Oh, no, it's all over.
Well, it is true that in many cases American children are less than respectable to their teachers and parents. But you cannot visualize a utopia in America. But in some ways the freedom they enjoy may seem too much to you. But did you notice that how smoothly the democracy is working in America because of the training they have with their freedom from the young ages?
Yes, they do, but democracy is working rather smoothly in Finland too, without this amount of
democracy is practiced all over the world, Peg, but it's practiced differently.
But did you?
We mean a little bit different thing with democracy.
Now we're getting off the point.
Now, did you think of the origin of the people here, their background? You see how they had to struggle hard to get a country like America, and everybody had to work very hard indeed. And do you think if the children were kept on that rigid rule and they weren't allowed to strike out for themselves, do you think they could have got a country like America as it is now?
Well, maybe so, but that doesn't mean any other country is not working hard. You can't say that Pakistan and India are not working hard.
No, I didn't say so.
Then-
I'm just trying to tell you that, well, the amount of freedom children in America have is just good for them. It's not too much, and nor is it too little.
I think it is good sometimes. But you must be intelligent enough to use the freedom.
Exactly.
Because if you don't, there's something wrong in your brain. So then you come to things like youth crimes, and you don't know you do something wrong. You are always allowed to do what you want, so...
Excuse me just a minute, Eva. Before we get on to juvenile delinquency, I wish you'd say a bit more about the schools that you've been in. Does the lack of respect that students show teachers affect their ability to learn?
No.
In public schools, Mrs. Waller, yes.
How does it, Nasreen?
Because the boys and girls are always talking to each other, and you see sometimes when the teacher is noticing a girl and a boy sort of whispering to each other something about their date tonight, or some meeting secretly at some place, something like that. And you see from going from one class to another, they hang around the corners talking to each other, the boys and girls, and that's how they miss at least 10 or 15 minutes of their period. But I find that the private schools are a bit stricter, and you can learn a bit more there. But I wouldn't say that in public schools.
I didn't find that. I think there are rather many schools here, especially private schools, where the rules are strict and you have to follow them. But usually, for example, in my schools, we have more respect for teachers, individual teachers. We stand up every day, we speak to them, we stand up when they come into the classes, and so on. And I have found out here, for example, one of the students, maybe he or she, spoke to one of his teachers in a way which could have thrown out him from my school. Just we are allowed to disagree with our teachers, but the way of disagreeing, you can disagree politely, is taught to us.
Oh, but does the freedom, what about the relationship between American students with their teachers and the relationship between you and your teachers at home? Is it very different?
Yes, it is definitely
Ours are more
very
reserved.
different.
It's not so informal as it is here.
Well, but which is the best learning situation?
Well, for learning situation, I think I should suggest my type, Mrs. Waller, but I feel that this informal relationship is good. I like that. But I think we would learn much more better if the schools were segregated.
What do you mean by segregated?
Well, boys and boys schools and girls and girls
We
schools.
sometimes mean a different thing by segregation. You would prefer a girls'
think so,
schools and
yes.
boys' schools instead of co-education.
Yes.
I don't agree. I don't. No, today, I mean, your education is not confined in your school only. I mean, well, you talk about the relationship between the opposite sexes. If you go to street, you can find, the advertisement of the movie, or you can control them. So you have to train the youths to, I mean, not to be
Well, you
tempted.
can train them separately, Peg.
No,
You can train the girls separately, you can train the boys separately. It's not necessary you should train them together. It's sometimes, well, it's quite embarrassing to a girl when you train them together.
Well, I wonder if it is possible to teach them the relation between the boys and girls without having them together.
I think it's possible. It becomes a bit too embarrassing for a girl, and sometimes a boy too, if you mean the facts of life.
Are you talking about a Pakistani girl, or are you talking about American
I'm
girl?
speaking of an Eastern girl
I see.
in general.
Well, let's not try to
Then why do you
see
apply
everything in our own point of view. I mean, in Korea, I think we are a little bit more respectable to our teachers, and our philosophy taught us to respect the elder people and to obey them. So naturally, in our schools, even in our schools, the active discussions or sharp questions were never encouraged. But the fact is, sometimes things may seem too informal, but being informal and discussing and experience things in freedom, you can learn a lot more, and the knowledge can be more practicable and more useful.
Excuse me, I want to interrupt again just 1 minute. Nasreen, I hear you've been into several arguments with girls here about whether or not it's a good idea to have parents choose your husband for you. Have you changed your ideas on that?
No, I'm afraid I haven't, Mrs. Waller. I still feel that arranged marriages are more successful than the love marriages. At least they've proven so in Pakistan and India and all over East. And I think that's one of the reasons why we have such a low percentage of divorce in Pakistan and India and other Eastern countries, which I think is the main factor here, because they have love marriages and not arranged marriages. I don't think the Americans will agree with me.
Well, let me go on now to the point that Eeva raised in the beginning and that Minji has just touched on. I think you ought to tell us a little more in detail, Eeva, what you meant when you said sometimes Americans don't have enough freedom. Can you explain that?
I mean, for example, from a point of view of girls. Here, it seems to me that girls who don't use lipstick, who don't go dating, who doesn't do things like those general things that everyone does here, she's considered a little bit odd. Isn't that true?
I think so too.
If she doesn't wear a jumper and a skirt in the school, a new jumper and a new skirt every day, she's considered. And that's something wrong with her. And they are not, they have not this, let's say, they don't go on, take a long walk alone. Or sit one evening just alone at their home and
They
reading some books or so on. They don't do, I haven't met one who
They don't
should
have
do it.
time to think about themselves, to
Yes.
sort of analyze themselves, to pause and to wonder what's going on. They
Well, but
just-
what has that got to do with freedom?
They don't have too much freedom to do that because all the other people around them do it. If they don't do that, so they are not quite, they are not normal.
Let me say my point, Mrs. Waller. I told you that I was in George School, and I had quite a leisurely time there, and I love to take a walk around the campus. It had a very beautiful scenery, and I wondered why the American youths cannot appreciate the bliss of solitude and of being in the arms of nature. But I don't think you can say that it is a result of the lack of freedom. Before, in the United States, I felt that they do not have too much freedom. But the thing that sometimes bothered me was the fact as you said, they do not know how to enjoy the true happiness. But I think it is a lack of intellectual capacity to use their freedom properly.
But your point is rather, Eeva, that there's a pressure for social conformity, that people should be like other people. As Minji said,
Yes, yes.
they have to have dates, and if they don't have, they have to lie about it to say they have
I think
dates.
so.
But nobody forces me to go out. I mean, with a girl or a boy. But what makes the person that he's compelled to go out is the lack of intellectual capacity on the part of that person.
Do you think that's a sign of intellectual capacity that he goes?
Let me
or
just
he
sharpen
goes
this.
dating.
Let
and
me
so
just
on?
sharpen this point of difference between you. You say there is a pressure towards social conformity that doesn't leave people as free as they should be to develop their own individuality.
Yes, I
You
know.
say it's not the pressure for social conformity, it's just the lack of intellectual ability to deal with the freedom you've got.
Well, but in most cases, in most American students, I found that they like to go out, and I found very few people who do not want to go out but feel compelled to go out because of the conformity. And I think in the case of the few people who feel in that way, it is definitely the lack of intellectual capacity.
Do you think so? Don't you think there are some students who are brilliant and I can say who are really interested in schoolwork in America, who would much rather sit at home and do some work or go for a lonely walk, as you've just said, and enjoy nature, but who don't do that because they're afraid of what their schoolmates would think about them.
Yes, that is why I think Americans are queer people. I mean, America is an absolutely free country, and nobody forces me to go out. But they feel compelled to go out because I mean, in my opinion, it is a definite lack of intellectual capacity.
Well,
for instance, I wouldn't go out. I wouldn't go out if I don't feel like going out. I mean, no matter what other people say. You know, when I was always taking walk around the George School campus. People thought I was queer, but I didn't mind. I felt quite happy.
Let's give Nasreen a chance on this.
Well, I wouldn't say that way because I talked to many American boys and girls, and I told them how our Eastern customs were, and I said, well, we don't date at all, and we don't meet boys at all. And after my conversation with these people, I turned to an American boy and I said, well, what do you think of an Eastern girl? He said, I think you're a perfect square. I said, well, now you'll have to explain me what a square means first. So another boy said, well, he means a prude, an English prude. So that means that, well, if I don't date, I'm an American, I'm a square, as the American says.
Well,
I don't date too, so
we're all squares.
Well, your point is very interesting, but what has it to do with the conformity and freedom? Could you make it clear?
No, I'm just saying that here it's so conventional to do everything, and people have so much freedom to do it here. I mean, everything is done. That when we don't do it there, they're sort of aghast,
yes.
horrified that we don't do it.
Nasreen, do you remember when we had the panel at Scott, when I asked them the questions, that why do you attach so much importance to dating? And that nobody could give me an answer out of a school of 600.
Yes.
They just talked about dating. Everybody asked me about dating, whether we went dating. I had the question about 100 times, but I asked them, 600 of them, just once, why do you attach so much importance to dating?
Why
And
do you attach so
much
much
importance to dating in the United States? And nobody could answer. It was just done.
They said
And
because
that
it's
was
done.
it. And they couldn't
To
give
get
me an
used
answer.
to the opposite sexes.
I said, couldn't you get used to them without going dating? After all, you were in a co-ed school. And they said, well, and nobody could give me a straightforward answer as I gave them when they asked me questions.
Have you found an answer yourself yet?
No, I haven't, and I do wish you can give me an answer now.
can you?
Well, maybe some of you have an idea.
Well,
No.
if you don't mind, I want to change the direction, and I would like to explain my statement that Americans are queer.
Good. I think you should explain your statement that Americans are queer.
I read in a book and sympathized with the author. I don't remember the name, but she's a Canadian, and said Americans are queer because they don't know how to rest. They build
Because they don't know how to rest.
well, wait a minute. They build large buildings for recreation and make many facilities, but they do not know how to rest. They are queer because they do not know how to read. They print more books than any other country, but they don't know how to read. They are queer because they don't know how to sing. Their song is it is not a music, it just sounds funny. It is just a sort of fashion. It does not has the quality to endure ages. And they are queer because they don't damn anybody. Everybody say that Americans are wrong in this way and this way. And they say, well, we are glad to accept your criticism. But we say our criticism, they just forget about it. And they don't mind.
You do find that Americans are more interested in criticism and willing to accept it than other peoples
I
are?
think so, yes, Mrs.
Maybe
Waller.
they are.
Among all the people that I've met here, I think the Americans take criticism more, nicely than any other person I've met in the world.
And then I think this question, how do you like America, is one of the, it shows that they want to know what other people think of them. And if they are forbidden to ask the question, how do you like America, they say, yes, but honestly, what do you think about our country?
Has anybody asked you?
Yeah.
How do you... I told them not to in your host school.
Well, I told you they turned it into, how do you like it here?
And then what do you say, Minji?
I said, where?
But, you know,
And then they stopped it when they saw that the teacher was listening.
you know, that question is quite natural. It can't be, I mean, it is not a monopoly of the
It is
Americans.
quite natural.
I would ask
Yeah.
that question if they come to Korea.
Yes, that's quite natural. It's just the same than though, but it's a nice weather today. That's the beginning of conversation.
Well, I hope you'll have some answers, though. By the time you go home, people will probably ask you the same thing, don't you think?
I think so, yes.
How we like America.
We've got to begin to sum up our discussion. I'm sorry, because we've hit so many high points and we haven't quite covered them all. If I can just sum up briefly, you have first talked about relations between students and teachers and whether that affects learning, also about whether coeducation is good or bad for the learning process. You've all reacted to the way we behave with our parents here. You have said that sometimes we have too much freedom and that in other ways we don't have enough freedom. We have a social pressure to conform. I wonder now, in concluding our discussion, there's one question I'd like to ask each of you based on what some of you
like
said.
America, please.
No, not how do you like America. I won't ask that. I'd like to ask this. If you had one gift that you could give the American people, that your people possess, and that you think American people don't have, what would that gift be? Is that a fair question?
Well, Mrs. Waller, I think that I could give the American woman especially modesty. I find that it's a bit lacking here. And another thing I can give them is relaxation and time to think, to rest, to have a good time with nature, as Peik says, and to have a quiet time with himself, to rest.
Yes, I think they should think more, observe more, talk less, and for heaven's sake, rush less.
Well, I want to tell them that they have such a precious heritage, namely freedom, and I want them to stick to this precious heritage with pride, courage, and faith. Oh, and I think they will utilize this freedom properly. As in case of conformity, they would use it, as Nasreen told us, by facing themselves and facing God and nature. So, and I think then their freedom will be used better, and their happiness will be richer and broadened.
It's sometimes said that Finland is a country where it is space for a grown-up man's breathe.
There is space
for a grown-up man's breathe.
for a grown-up man to breathe.
And I would like to give that to Americans, especially for people in New York.
Well, thank you very much, Eeva. We all appreciate that. You've been listening to 4 students from 4 countries discussing, do American children have too much freedom? They were Nasreen Ahmad from Pakistan, Mijiba KARIBO from Nigeria, Nakchung PAIK from Korea, and Eeva LEHTINEN from Finland. Next week, at this time, another group of forum delegates will be discussing the question, does the key to peace in this century lie with the non-white peoples